Hello and welcome to Habits That Bad Smite Players Have. Small tactics and techniques that are certain to put a ceiling on the level that you play at. If you find yourself doing any of these, then it's time to drop them like, well, a bad habit I guess. In at number 1 is this: jumping while running away. I see so many players doing this. Unfortunately, this isn't Sekiro, and a well-timed jump is not going to avoid any damage. By jumping, all you are doing is telling your chasing opponent that for the next second you won't be able to cast any abilities, move out of the way, or juke, or do anything really. In effect, you are knocking yourself up. There is quite literally no advantage to jumping in Smite. In fact, you can even disable this in the settings. If this is something you find yourself doing, then do yourself a favour and turn it off. Habit number 2 is leaving the base without a ward. Anytime you back in Conquest, unless you are leaving with a tier 3 item, you should always be picking up at least one ward. They cost a measly 50 gold, which means that the time you spend back walking to lane, you've earned it back. Or you can earn it back by watching the death timer screen because you missed the enemy jungler ganking you. If you get ganked in any lane with no wards placed, regardless of what anybody else on the team is doing, that is entirely on you. Buy a ward, stop a gank, save a life. This leads quite nicely onto my next point, which is blaming your jungler for either you being ganked or them not being there. Junglers have a huge area of the map to cover and they can't be everywhere at once. Before you engage in any fight, you should be checking both the position of your jungler and the enemy jungler. If your jungler is on the other side of the map, or the enemy jungler is unknown, then any fight that you engage in is a risk, and once again, it's on you if it goes wrong. So, save your gank right lane, gank right lane, gank right lane pal, because it's your mistake. And I say this as someone who doesn't play jungle, so I'm not even being biased. Next up, and oh boy, is this one of my personal pet peeves. It's people who pick gods in the solo or support role and build them full damage. This is incredibly selfish and incredibly stupid. Your job in these roles is to be a tanky frontliner and keep your team alive, not to play as a secondary mid laner, jungler or carry. Just play and build roles properly. Winning your solo lane as a full damage Vulcan is not impressive, because my guess is you lost the late game because your team is a tank missing. Oh, and if you pick a hunter, mage or assassin in the solo lane, you don't get to complain when the enemy jungler camps you hard. There's a reason warriors play in this lane. Still not convinced? Go and watch the most recent Smite World Championships and see how many times a full damage build is put on a support or solo laner. I'll save you the time. It isn't. So if the best players in the world aren't doing it, then why are you? Next up is staying in your lane too long. Once the game has hit the mid game, you should be rotating around to where the team fights are. Fire Giant, Gold Fury, mid lane, it doesn't matter. Go into team fights as a group. If your entire team is taking the Gold Fury and you're in the solo lane just clearing waves, then the enemy is in a position to outnumber your team at the objective. Steal it and then charge down the lane and take multiple objectives. If someone makes the call to attack a lane or objective, don't just assume you know better. They might have seen something you haven't. Look at the map and ask yourself, where should I be to be most effective for the entire team? Next up, and oh boy, does this annoy the community. It's when people get caught high in lane or in the jungle in the late game for no reason. At 25 minutes plus, if you kill the enemy hunter, mage or assassin, then that's a trigger that you can now dive a teamfight and likely win. If you are playing one of these roles, then you have no idea where the enemy team is, then you should be glued to your team. If you get caught wandering about in the jungle, then you may have just thrown the game. The amount of times that people simply do not group up in the late game and get caught alone is the reason why so many games are won and lost. Group up in the late game. It should be common sense, but unfortunately it really isn't. Finally, we move on to the cherry on the cake. The absolute worst thing that bad players do in this game, and it's a plague in the community. And that is just give up. I can't remember the last time I was involved in a ranked game and somebody didn't try and surrender at some point. It's a huge chunk of the community, they just give up when things don't go their way. Yes, there are times when surrendering is fine and probably the right thing to do, but why is everybody so quick to give up? I've seen late game throws from teams who were miles ahead. I've seen people make clutch comebacks. I've seen games flip on their head from a single team fight. If the current world champions had the mentality of the general community, they wouldn't be the world champions. They came from 2-0 down and with their Titan on less than 10% health to win a semi-final and then go on to win the world final. So when you're playing, channel your inner PK Knights and stop screaming F6 because you died. You're a bad player if you do so, whether you like it or not. So just stop. Take it as a chance to learn how to play from behind. You're not going to be ahead in every lane in every single game. And I know it's usually the toxic players that do this and they're no help to the community either. But don't let them get away with it. Don't surrender, don't give up, just play out the game and take it as a lesson. And that brings the list to an end. I hope I've helped a few people out there and potentially made the community a slightly better place. But before we go, here's a little bonus video for you. Welcome to 1 Bad Habits that YouTubers have. Number 1, asking people to like and subscribe.